Before the documentary begins, I would like to provide a brief in a few lines first on the title, Ottoman Empire, the Secret System That Made. It survived for 600 years, untold history. The year is 1453. A crimson sky looms over Constantinople as cannon fire shakes the earth. Smoke curls through the air. The walls that once seemed invincible are trembling. On one side, the defenders of a 1,000-year-old Christian empire. On the other, a 21-year-old sultan with a dream so vast, it would bend the course of history itself. And when the dust settles, one empire dies, so another may rise. But what was it that made this new empire, the Ottoman Empire, not just survive, but thrive for more than 6 centuries? Was it military genius, ruthless politics, or something deeper, something almost mythical? Because behind every battle, every palace, every act of conquest, there were secrets, whispered in courts, hidden in shadows, and sealed in blood. Before we uncover the secrets that kept the Ottoman Empire alive for centuries, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the untold stories of empires that shaped our world. Let us now begin the complete documentary on Ottoman Empire, the secret system that made it survive for 600 years. Untold history. The Ottoman Empire's rise began not with grandeur, but with grit, a story born in the rugged plains of Anatolia, where ambition met faith and transformed nomads into conquerors. At the heart of this rise was Osman, the man whose name would become the seed of an empire. In a time when chaos ruled the lands, the Mongols had shattered the once powerful Islamic world, and the Byzantine Empire, though ancient, was weakened and gasping for life. Amid this uncertainty, Osman appeared, not as a king, but as a visionary. His people were wanderers, Turkic tribes who had long lived between mountains and rivers, carrying swords instead of crowns, and dreams instead of maps. Osman saw the collapse of empires not as an ending, but as an opening, a chance to build something new. His vision was more than conquest. It was destiny wrapped in faith. The Ottomans were guided by an idea called Gaza, a sacred duty to expand the realm of Islam, to bring justice and unity where chaos reigned. But faith alone doesn't forge empires. Strategy does. Osman and his warriors understood that survival on the frontier required more than belief. It demanded flexibility. They fought Byzantines, allied with rival Turkish clans, and welcomed anyone willing to serve the cause. This inclusivity became their first secret weapon. The Ottomans didn't erase the cultures they encountered. They absorbed them. From the Persians, they took administration. From the Arabs, the richness of law and scholarship, and from the Byzantines, the art of governance. Every conquest wasn't destruction. It was assimilation. What began as a cluster of tents and wooden forts slowly became a network of power. Osman's successors, Orhan and Murad, refined what he had started. They built fortresses, created laws, and expanded their territories, each victory carrying a deeper meaning. As the empire grew, its people didn't see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as chosen, protectors of divine order. This belief turned their army into an unstoppable force. When they marched, it wasn't just men with swords. It was an army driven by faith, discipline, and an unshakable sense of purpose. The Ottomans understood the power of unity in diversity. They ruled over Greeks, Armenians, Kurds, Arabs, and countless others, and instead of crushing them, they offered protection and stability. In return, they gained loyalty, Farmers tilled their lands, merchants traded freely, and scholars taught in peace. This balance between strength and tolerance became the backbone of Ottoman power. They didn't rely only on the sword. They relied on the system. As the 14th century unfolded, the Ottomans grew from a frontier principality into a rising empire. Under Sultan Murad I, they crossed into Europe, establishing their presence in the Balkans. This was no small feat. The Balkans were fragmented but fiercely defended, yet the Ottomans moved with precision. They married diplomacy with warfare, offering peace to those who submitted and swift retribution to those who resisted. They built bridges, not only across rivers but between faiths and nations. This ability to blend power with pragmatism set them apart from every rival. Then came Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt. His speed on the battlefield was legendary. Within a decade, he consolidated Ottoman power like never before, but destiny tested them early. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, the Mongol conqueror Timur crushed the Ottomans, capturing Bayezid himself. For most empires, that would have been the end, but not for the Ottomans. What followed was not collapse, but resurrection. During the interregnum, Osman's descendants fought among themselves, yet even in division, the dream remained alive. The idea of the empire, of order, faith, and purpose, never died. When Mehmed I restored unity, it was clear the Ottomans were not just survivors. They were eternal students of power, always learning, always adapting. By the mid-15th century, their eyes turned toward the ultimate prize, Constantinople. For centuries, it had been the heart of the Byzantine world, a city so strong that even the most powerful armies had broken against its walls. But for Sultan Mehmed II, it was more than a city. It was destiny fulfilled. At just 21, he carried the weight of prophecy. The Prophet Muhammad was said to have declared that a blessed commander would one day conquer Constantinople. Mehmed intended to be that man. He didn't charge blindly. He calculated. He built one of the largest cannons the world had ever seen, a weapon that could shatter the unshakable walls. He constructed a fortress on the Bosphorus to cut off supplies. He gathered architects, engineers, and soldiers from across the empire, each playing their part in a plan that seemed impossible. In April 1453, the siege began. For 53 days, thunder rolled across the city as cannonballs tore through the ancient walls. The Byzantines fought desperately, their churches filled with prayers and tears. But destiny does not wait. On May 29th, the Ottomans stormed the city. The gates were breached, the cross fell, and the crescent rose. Constantinople, the jewel of the world, had fallen. But what Mehmed did next revealed the true genius of the Ottoman mind. He didn't destroy the city, he rebuilt it. He opened its gates to all, Muslims, Christians, Jews, offering them a place under his rule. He transformed Hagia Sophia, the grandest church of Christendom, into a mosque, not out of desecration, but as a symbol of renewal. The city was reborn as Istanbul, the new capital of a rising empire. Under Mehmed, the Ottomans became more than conquerors. They became architects of civilization. Schools, mosques, and markets flourished. Trade routes stretched across continents. The empire became the meeting point of East and West, faith and science, tradition and innovation. In Istanbul, scholars debated beneath marble domes while merchants carried silks from China and spices from India. The empire pulsed like a living organism, vast, diverse, and thriving. Every system Mehmed built was designed to endure. The army became a professional force, led by the elite janissaries, loyal only to the Sultan. The legal system fused Islamic law with practical governance, ensuring justice even in the farthest provinces. The treasury flowed with gold from trade, tribute, and taxation, and at the center of it all stood the Sultan, not merely a ruler, but a symbol of divine order on earth. By the end of the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire had become a world power. Its flag flew over 3 continents, and its name inspired both awe and fear. But beneath the grandeur was something more profound, a sense of purpose that transcended time. For Osman's descendants, empire was not just about territory. It was about fulfilling a destiny that began with faith, carried through discipline, and sealed in vision. The rise of the Ottoman Empire wasn't an accident of history. It was the product of belief fused with brilliance, a civilization that understood how to balance sword and scripture, power and mercy, conquest and culture. Their story was not one of sudden triumph, but of deliberate endurance. They didn't just build an empire, they built a legacy designed to last forever. And that was their secret. A faith that guided, a system that sustained, and a vision that refused to die. Power alone could never have held together an empire that stretched across 3 continents and ruled over millions of people for centuries. The Ottomans understood that what conquers lands cannot always govern them, and what wins battles cannot always sustain peace. The empire's strength lay not in the swing of the sword, but in the machinery that controlled the hand that held it. The Ottoman system was not just governance. It was a living organism, disciplined, hierarchical, and aware of its own survival. It thrived because it understood one eternal truth. To rule men, one must understand them. At the center of this organism stood the Sultan, the shadow of God on earth, the caliph of the faithful, and the ultimate symbol of authority. Yet his throne was both a seat of glory and a cage of fear. For though the world saw him as all-powerful, inside the walls of his palace, his every step was watched, his every word carried consequences. The palace was both a court and a labyrinth. Topkapi Palace, glittering above the Bosphorus, seemed like a paradise of marble and gold. But behind its beauty, it was a battlefield of politics and ambition. Inside its courtyards, the air carried the scent of incense mixed with quiet dread. Every decision, every whisper, every gaze carried weight. The Grand Vizier, the Sultan's right hand, controlled the empire's daily affairs. But his power was temporary, his loyalty conditional, and his life uncertain. A single accusation, a failed campaign, or a misinterpreted gesture could end with a silken bowstring around his neck. And yet the system thrived because it allowed no complacency. Fear was not chaos here. It was discipline. The palace's most mysterious chamber was the harem, often romanticized, but in truth a center of immense political influence. Within those veiled halls lived not just wives and concubines, but women who could shape the fate of nations. The Sultan's mother, known as the Valid Sultan, held near royal power. Her counsel often feared more than the vizier's advice. The mothers of princes plotted to secure the future throne for their sons, forging alliances through whispers, poison, and persuasion. Eunuchs who guarded the harem and its secrets became some of the most trusted yet dangerous figures in the empire. Invisible but ever present, loyal but capable of betrayal. Through this web of intrigue and balance, the empire's heartbeat remained steady. Order was not merely enforced through law, but embedded in the very fabric of daily life. Society itself was structured with the precision of clockwork. Everyone knew their place, from the peasant who tilled the soil to the scholar who debated philosophy in the madrasas. The Ottomans divided their world into millets, communities organized by religion and culture, each with its own laws and leaders. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived under the same sky, each governed by their own traditions, yet united under the Sultan's justice. It was a mosaic of control, where difference was not erased but managed. This system brought stability. In a time when Europe was tearing itself apart over faith, the Ottomans allowed multiple religions to coexist. Churches stood beside mosques, synagogues echoed prayers alongside the call to prayer, and all of it existed under the silent gaze of the Sultan, who demanded loyalty, not uniformity. It was this tolerance, born from pragmatism rather than kindness, that kept rebellion at bay and the empire's heart beating strong. But no system was more symbolic of Ottoman power than its army, particularly the Janissaries. They were not born Ottomans, they were made. Through a system known as devshirme, Christian boys from the Balkans were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to serve the Sultan. They grew into an elite corps, disciplined, fearless, and utterly loyal. To them, the Sultan was not just a ruler. He was a father, a godlike figure. They became his sword and his shield, his instrument of justice and expansion. For centuries, the Janissaries embodied the empire's might. Their marches struck fear into enemies, their precision in battle unmatched. But their discipline came with a paradox. The stronger they grew, the more indispensable they became, and the more power they began to wield beyond the battlefield. Over time, they transformed from loyal servants into political actors, capable of making or unmaking sultans. Still, for much of the empire's golden age, their loyalty remained unbroken, and through them, the Ottomans built an empire that could rival Rome in its organization and Persia in its refinement. The empire's administration mirrored its military structure, layered, efficient, and adaptable. Governors ruled the provinces with firm authority, but were always watched by the center. Taxes were meticulously collected, justice delivered with precision, and trade routes protected with unwavering vigilance. The empire became the beating heart of world commerce. Caravans from the east carried silk, spices, and jewels, while ships sailed from Istanbul's harbors loaded with goods bound for Venice, Cairo, and beyond. The Ottomans controlled the arteries of global trade, and wealth flowed into their treasury like a river of gold. Yet for all their power, the Ottomans never forgot the importance of legitimacy. The Sultan ruled not only by might but by divine right, the protector of Islam, the leader of the faithful. Religion was not a separate institution. It was woven into the empire's foundation. Scholars known as the ulama advised on matters of law and morality, ensuring that governance remained tied to faith. The empire's legal system balanced Sharia with administrative law, creating a harmony that allowed both justice and order to coexist. The Ottomans built cities that reflected this philosophy, structured, balanced, and purposeful. Istanbul became the crown jewel, a place where the sacred and the secular merged seamlessly. Its skyline, dotted with domes and minarets, symbolized not only beauty, but authority. Each mosque was more than a place of worship. It was a statement of power, built by architects who turned stone into poetry. The empire's architecture mirrored its political genius, grand, stable, and enduring. But beneath the splendor lay the shadows that every great empire hides. The same structure that ensured stability also suffocated innovation. The strict hierarchy that brought order slowly strangled flexibility. The scholars who once explored the stars now recited the same verses. The soldiers who once conquered new lands now guarded traditions. The empire's golden machine began to rust, not suddenly, but quietly, invisibly. By the 16th century, under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire reached its zenith. Its borders stretched from the heart of Europe to the deserts of Arabia. Art, law, and architecture flourished, yet with every rise comes the seed of decline. Suleiman's successors inherited his glory but not his genius. They ruled from the same palace, beneath the same domes, but their vision was narrower, their grip weaker. Power, once a sacred responsibility, began to turn into luxury. The palace that once buzzed with strategy now whispered with indulgence. Still, the system endured. It endured because it was built not on passion, but on precision. Every part, the harem, the janissaries, the viziers, the scholars, functioned as both balance and burden. It was a web that caught anyone who tried to disrupt it. The Sultan could no longer act freely. Even he was bound by the machine his ancestors had created. And yet this was the paradox that made the Ottoman Empire so extraordinary. Its ability to maintain order even as the world around it changed. While Europe tore itself apart in revolutions and reformations, the Ottomans stood firm. Still governed by the same system that had carried them from a frontier tribe to a world power. It was both their greatest strength and their slow undoing. The machine that once drove their expansion became the weight that held them still. The same fear that had maintained order began to choke innovation. But for now, the empire still stood unbroken, its domes glinting under the sun. Its armies still feared, its name still spoken with awe. The Ottoman machine continued to move, precise and powerful, unaware that the silence within its gears was the first echo of its inevitable decline. Empires rarely collapse in a single heartbeat. They fade slowly, like the last ember of a dying fire, glowing quietly before the darkness takes over. The Ottoman Empire was no exception. For centuries it had seemed eternal, a realm so vast that the rising sun always found one of its banners waving somewhere across the horizon. Yet time is the one enemy no empire can defeat. The same system that had once made the Ottomans invincible had become their invisible cage, and the slow unraveling began not with invasion, but with hesitation, the kind that seeps into the hearts of men when they forget what made them great. The cracks appeared quietly. In the 17th century, the world was changing in ways the old empire couldn't easily understand. Europe was discovering new worlds, mastering science, and building machines that could outpace any army. New ideas about freedom, economics, and nationalism were spreading like wildfire. But in Istanbul, time seemed to move slower. The Ottoman court still glittered, but its brilliance had turned into ritual. The Sultan still sat upon his golden throne, but his words carried less weight. Ministers schemed for power, generals guarded privilege, and scholars clung to tradition as though it were armor against progress. The empire's once formidable military began to show its age. The janissaries, once the epitome of discipline, had become corrupt and unmanageable. They no longer marched for faith or duty, but for influence and wealth. They refused to adopt new tactics or technologies, believing their old ways sacred. The same soldiers who had once conquered Constantinople now resisted change with violence, fearing it would threaten their power. When reform-minded sultans tried to modernize the army, they were often met with rebellion. The sword that had once defended the empire had turned inward. Economically, the empire was bleeding. The great trade routes that had once made Istanbul the center of the world were now shifting. European explorers had found sea routes around Africa, bypassing Ottoman-controlled lands. Gold and silver from the Americas flooded Europe, enriching kingdoms that once paid tribute to the Sultan. Inflation swept through the empire. Farmers struggled, markets shrank, and corruption spread. The treasury that had once overflowed now struggled to pay soldiers. Governors in distant provinces began to act as independent rulers, collecting taxes but sending little back to the capital. Yet even in decline, the empire remained proud. Its rulers still believed they were chosen by God, heirs to a sacred trust. They continued to build mosques, pass decrees, and host foreign ambassadors in halls lined with silk and gold. To the outside world, the Ottomans were still an empire of splendor. But beneath the marble floors of Topkapi Palace, unease festered. The empire had grown too vast, too complex, too dependent on a system that no longer fit the age. The machine that once kept everything in perfect order had turned against itself. In the 18th century, the Ottomans watched as Europe raced ahead. Revolutions, science, factories, and printing presses reshaping the modern world. The empire, bound by its traditions, hesitated to adapt. The ulama resisted modern education, seeing it as a threat to religion. Printing in Turkish was banned for over a century, fearing it would spread ideas uncontrollable by the state. Where once scholars had debated philosophy and mathematics, now they recited the same lessons from memory. Innovation, the force that once fueled Ottoman greatness, had been replaced by stagnation. But decline is never a straight descent. The Ottomans still had moments of resilience, flashes of brilliance that hinted at revival. Reformers emerged, visionaries who refused to accept decay as destiny. The most famous among them came in the 19th century, during a period known as the Tanzimat, the reorganization. These reforms aimed to modernize the empire from within. New schools were opened, new laws were written, and the military was restructured along European lines. Bureaucrats dreamed of a modern Ottoman state, one that could compete with the West without losing its soul. For a brief moment, hope flickered. The empire began to modernize its army, build railroads, and send students to study in Europe. Newspapers emerged, spreading new ideas about identity and progress. But the deeper problem remained. The empire was no longer one people, but many, bound together by force and habit rather than unity. Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, Serbs, Kurds, and others all lived under the same banner, but their loyalties had begun to shift. Nationalism, born in Europe, crept into the Ottoman heart. Each group began to see itself not as a part of an empire, but as a nation waiting to be free. The empire that had once been proud of its diversity now found it to be a curse. Rebellions erupted in the Balkans. Greece gained independence. Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria followed. The empire's borders began to shrink, each loss carving away not just land but confidence. The great powers of Europe, Britain, France, and Russia, began circling like vultures, exploiting the Ottomans' weakness for their own gain. Diplomats called it the Eastern Question. What would happen when the empire finally fell? Inside Istanbul, reformers fought conservatives in a silent war. Some argued that the only way to survive was to westernize completely, to embrace modern education, industry, and law. Others believed the empire could only be saved by returning to pure Islamic roots. The tension between progress and tradition tore through every institution, every family, every corner of Ottoman society. Sultans came and went, some dreaming of renewal, others content to preserve what little remained. Then came the final storm. World War I. The Ottoman Empire, weakened and desperate, allied itself with Germany, hoping victory would restore its strength. Instead, it sealed its fate. The war brought destruction, famine, and rebellion. Arab tribes, once loyal, rose against Ottoman rule with British support. In the deserts of Arabia, the empire's centuries-old authority evaporated. Cities that had been Ottoman for generations fell one after another. By 1918, the empire's armies were broken, its economy shattered, its people starving. The once mighty empire signed an armistice that ended 6 centuries of dominance. The Sultan's authority became symbolic, his palace filled with echoes rather than power. Foreign troops entered Istanbul. The empire that had once united continents was now divided by foreign treaties. For the first time in history, the Ottomans faced not rebellion but erasure. And yet, even in this darkest hour, something unexpected happened. From the ruins rose a new voice, a leader determined to build not an empire, but a nation. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, a soldier shaped by war, led a movement to create a modern, secular state from the ashes of the Ottoman world. In 1922, the Sultanate was officially abolished. The Caliphate followed soon after. The empire, once eternal, was gone. In its place stood the Republic of Turkey, born not in conquest, but in survival. But the Ottoman legacy did not die with its empire. It lingered in the architecture of mosques and bridges that still stood proudly across 3 continents. It lived in the music, the poetry, the food, the languages that intertwined over centuries of shared history. It whispered in the call to prayer that echoed from Sarajevo to Damascus, in the laws that shaped nations long after the empire's fall. What made the Ottoman Empire last for centuries was never just its armies or its wealth. It was its ability to adapt, to change without losing its essence, to endure despite its wounds. Faith gave it direction, order gave it strength, and resilience gave it life far beyond its borders. Its fall was not failure. It was transformation. Every empire eventually fades, but the greatest ones leave traces that time cannot erase. The Ottoman Empire was not merely a chapter of history. It was a civilization that reshaped continents, blended worlds, and proved that power is more than territory. It is memory. And in that memory, the Ottomans still live, in the domes that pierce the sky, in the streets once walked by sultans and merchants, in the hearts of those who still feel the echo of a world that believed it could last forever. But as the sun set on the Ottoman Empire, its shadow did not vanish. It stretched across history, whispering to the future. From the ashes of its fall rose new powers, new borders, and new conflicts that still shape our world today. Yet deep within the ruins of its palaces and the silence of its forgotten tombs, one question lingers. Was the empire truly destroyed, or did its influence merely change its form? The story of the Ottoman Empire ends here, but the secrets it left behind may unlock a truth far more unsettling, a truth buried in the rise of the next great empire that learned from its fall.